it's so much, we kind of thought that, well, maybe we'll do both sides, but really the other side, I mean, most people know the arguments for an old Earth, right? Because it surrounds you all the time. I'm hoping that the title didn't scare people away, because, and I'm not sure I would have titled it that, Young Earth Creationism, because creationism is an ism, right? And it gives the implied idea that you have allegiance to the viewpoint regardless of the evidence. So, for instance, there's socialism, there's nationalism, right? There's capitalism, which many people are, proponents of, but yet capitalism was actually named by socialists. It was given to them as a pejorative, but they wear it as a badge of honor, right? Although some capitalists prefer to be called free market advocates. But so ism kind of implies that my dedication is to young Earth regardless, and that's not the case for me. So my views have changed over the years. I started out as being an old Earth person. I didn't see any reason why the prevailing science wasn't correct. Then I stumbled across evidence that the Earth was actually young. I became young Earth. I continued to study it. During my graduate work, most of my professors were old Earth Christians, and I wanted to give the whole topic another address. So I listened to what they said, and became convinced that they were right, that the Earth was old. And so, but not long after that, I thought, well, I do remember that there were some very strong, good arguments for young Earth. Let me go relook at both sides again. And so I'm currently in the young Earth camp. There's been so much new information that's come out in the past, I'd say, decade, that I find it hard to believe that I would go back to old Earth again. I think the preponderance of the evidence is very strongly in favor of the young Earth. But there's so much of it, it's just hard to get your head wrapped around it. Let me start sharing the screen here. I guess I could have had something up while I was giving those introductory remarks. Oh, I have to optimize for video clips and share sound. There we go. Okay, so, because I have to now I select the item and hit the share button. I can do this. Woohoo! And hit the slideshow button. Let's see if that works. You have to do it twice. Yes, I had to get its attention. There you go. What do you think? Cool?
Yeah.
Very cool.
All right. So I'm not a proponent of creationism per se. I am a proponent of the truth and finding the truth by studying the evidence. That's how I became a Christian, and that's how I approach most things in life. So Christians have the option about being open-minded about this topic. Being a Christian doesn't require you to believe in a young Earth. Many Christians do believe in a young Earth, and many Christians believe that the Earth is old. There's no tenet that you have to believe in the virgin birth, you have to believe in the resurrection, and you have to believe the Earth is young, right? That's simply not in there. But if you're an evolutionist, it does require you to believe in an old Earth. So they have no other option, right? Evolution requires long ages because it's a very slow process, so slow that you can't see it happening in your lifetime. So for evolutionists, any evidence, right, that shows that the Earth is young has to be false, right? It must be something wrong. It's some kind of mistake. So even when they come across evidence that shows that the Earth is actually young, they think they've made a mistake. They ignore it. They figure out a workaround because there is no other viable option. The Earth simply has to be old for evolution to be true. Christians have the luxury of looking honestly at all the evidence and siding with the preponderance of the evidence. Now, I just want to ask that everybody can hear me okay, right?
Yes.
I can hear
Okay,
you.
good, because for some reason I'm not used to this type of Zoom meeting where all of the pictures of everybody has gone away. And I actually don't even see how to, oh, there it is. Okay, so if I wanted to see everybody, no. Yeah, I don't even see where you are that I could join you if I wanted to. Oh, here we go. Mr. Ed entered the waiting room. All right, somebody let Mr. Ed in. All right, he's a horse, of course, of course. All right, now, so are you still seeing, no, you're seeing everything I share. So even as I look around, you're seeing that also, correct?
Yeah, we see a gray screen.
Oh,
now-
you see the PowerPoint Christian open-mindedness, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so what I want you to do is think about how you can be open-minded. And it may require a little bit of imagination on your part, because you may not have heard anything like this before tonight. You may have always been told that the Earth is old. Your family, your professors, the books you read, the movies you see, may have you believing it. So it'll be like really strange. But think about this. What if everyone in the world knew for a fact that evolution was false, right? What if they had already long ago given up on evolution? It was this interesting theory. It was very popular for 100 years. But now the science has come in. We know for certain that all of life was engineered, that it was designed, created. And so we know for sure that macroevolution, right, microbes to microbiologist type of evolution doesn't occur. Would it then be possible to examine the evidence of if the Earth is young or not? Right? Wouldn't that make things a lot more acceptable? Wouldn't people be a lot more open-minded about what the evidence is? So for those who are hearing this for the first time, open your mind, be willing to listen, pretend you're on a jury and somebody's life is at stake, right? This is a capital offense and you have to determine guilt or innocence by listening to the evidence. So listen to the evidence and give it a fair shake, just as you would hope that if you were on trial for your life, that your jury would also listen to the evidence. But also the point is to show how much of an influence the theory of evolution is, that a lot of the decision about what counts as evidence for the age of the Earth is actually depends on the fact that people believe that evolution is true. And it just cannot be any other way. All right, so not seeing the forest for the trees. So when we look at evidence, there's a problem if you don't see the forest for the trees. Now, this is a saying that you've probably heard. I don't know how popular it is these days. Certainly when I was growing up, I was told always to be careful that you are not seeing the forest for the trees. And the idea is that if you're in a forest, sometimes you don't realize you're in a forest because you only see a couple of trees, right? You see a tree right in front of you, and it's blocking part of your view. You might see a couple of other trees to your right and left, but you have no idea that you're in this massive forest. So there are right ways and wrong ways of weighing evidence, right? Of discovering the world around you. You can focus on that one tree in front of you and think that that's all there is to this forest. In reality, you're in a forest where there are millions upon millions of trees, and you don't want to miss the forest because there's a tree right in your face. A lot of people have been falsely imprisoned. I'll continue this trial motif here. A lot of people have been falsely imprisoned, and I've done lectures on some of them because it's helpful to determine how you ought to weigh evidence. A single piece of evidence has falsely imprisoned people because that one piece of evidence was used to outweigh all of the other evidence, right? That one piece of evidence blocked thinking carefully about all the other pieces of evidence. Unfortunately for tonight, we don't have the time to get into some of those cases, but some of them have been made into movies and things because they're so famous. So by looking at the evidence one by one, without the cumulative weight of all of them combined, people get led astray. So for instance, again, I don't want to get into specifically. If you have a question about this, we can come back to it. But I think you get the general point that one piece of evidence can sometimes outweigh a cumulative weight of combined evidence. Just briefly, there's a case of a man who was put in prison for 8 years for bank robbery falsely because of a thumbprint. There was a thumbprint on the counter in the bank that was his thumbprint, but he was actually at a party where 30 people saw him and testified. Not just a couple of his friends at the party. Every single person who was at the party testified on oath that he was there for the entire time and could not have been the person guilty of robbing the bank. And yet he was put in jail falsely for 8 years. Let's see. So cold case, this is how cold cases get solved, right? Cold case detectives solve cases by examining the weight of all the evidence, the little bit of evidence that doesn't really add up to much by itself. And in probability theory, this is called Bayesian probability. And Bayesian taught that you can't just weigh one piece of information against another and see what the probability is. You have to look at all the evidence, basically, is what he was saying. You have to compare the probability of something happening based on the background information that you know. And the more background information that you know, the better you are able to weigh the evidence. Okay, again, we can do a whole talk on this, but for the interest of time, we just have to move ahead. And so the point of this whole slide is for you to look for the forest. Right? Look for the forest. Don't try to debunk each individual item, say based on something strong like radiometric dating, right? Radiometric dating is a very strong argument for the age of the Earth, but and nothing really compares to it. but it's the weight of the entirety of all the evidence that outweighs the one that, you know, frankly, I think most old Earth people would agree that, you know, there are 2 or 3 that they would go to, but one of them certainly is radiometric dating, which we'll address in full in the near future. Okay, so dating the Earth. How do we date the Earth? Well, thousands of processes occur on the Earth and can be used to date the Earth, right? Physical processes, biological processes, chemical processes, all going on simultaneously, and very many of these will allow themselves to examination and can give information on the possible age of the Earth. 90% of these processes give ages that are far too young for evolutionary theories to be true. Many of them give a maximum possible age that refutes the billions of years believed by evolutionists. So you might get in this physical geologic process, the maximum possible age for the Earth is 1 million years. Well, that doesn't agree with the Bible, right? Or at least doesn't agree with a young Earth interpretation of the Bible. But 1 million years is not anywhere near the amount of time that you need for evolution to occur. All right, first piece of evidence, supernova remnants. Now, I guess I will check in with everybody. Because I cannot see the videos, which I don't know why I can't see the videos, I don't know that I'm still connected. So I'm going to need to hear some noise every once in a while to know that I'm still connected. Okay, there you go. I heard something. All right, so let's talk about supernova remnants. So I thought we would talk, we kind of move from outer space down to the Earth and then to biological processes, but we'll go a little bit back and forth just so that things don't get too bogged down. Geology might not be your field of interest, so we'll try to keep things diverse. So a supernova is an explosion of a massive star. The supernova remnants will keep expanding for hundreds and thousands of years according to physics. So that picture on the left is a supernova. Yet there are zero very old, widely expanded, which are called stage 3 supernova remnants, and few moderately old stage 2 ones in our galaxy, the Milky Way, or its satellite galaxies, the Magellanic Clouds. So neither in our galaxy nor in our nearby galaxies do we find any stage 3 supernova remnants, and that's just should not be. So this is just what we would expect if these galaxies had not existed long enough for wide expansion. Here is a short video clip, just a 1-minute video. So next evidence, the faint young sun paradox, the faint young sun paradox. So according to stellar evolutionary theory, the sun's core transforms from hydrogen to helium by means of nuclear fusion. The upshot is that over several billion years, the sun ought to have brightened 40% since its formation and 25% since the appearance of life on Earth. For the latter, since life on Earth, that translates into a 16 to 18 degrees centigrade temperature increase on the Earth. The current average temperature is 15 degrees centigrade as of last year. Well, actually, as of 2019. So the Earth ought to have had a minus 2 degrees centigrade temperature when life appeared. Now, as a comparison, like how cold is that? During the Ice Age, the average temperature of the Earth was 8 degrees centigrade. So this is extremely, extremely cold and very inhospitable to life. But also there's a problem that happens if the Earth starts out that cold, right? And of course, before that, it would have even been colder, like minus 50 degrees centigrade. And that's what theoreticians call the Snowball Earth. It would not, computer modeling shows that the Earth would not have thawed. It would not have thawed because the albedo of snow and ice would reflect back all the heat coming from the sun. So you run into a real problem. You have to generate other means. For instance, there would have to be something like large amounts of methane in the atmosphere, which paleontologists, climate paleontologists tell us is simply not the case. So there's a real problem with, if the Earth is that as old as it is, the sun is going through this process that's claimed, how could we have gotten life? How could we have come out of a snowball Earth? Lunar recession, next evidence. Tidal friction causes the moon to slowly recede from the Earth at about 1.5 inches per year. And the rate would have been greater in the past. So it's basically moving away and slowing down a bit. But even if the moon had started receding from being in contact with the Earth, actually touching the Earth, which of course would be physically impossible for it to stay in orbit and touch the Earth, besides it being torn apart by gravitational waves. But it would have taken only 1.4 billion years to reach its present distance, right? So that's less than 1/3 of the time that the Earth is supposedly been around. So this gives a maximum possible age of the moon, not the actual age, right? But a maximum possible age. It cannot possibly be older than 1.4 billion years. So this is far too young for evolution and much younger than the radiometric dates assigned to moon rocks. Okay, helium in rocks and in the atmosphere. So this is a twofer, and we'll find out that it's actually a threefer. So helium in rocks and in the atmosphere. Let's start with the atmosphere. Helium is pouring into the atmosphere from radioactivity, from radioactive decay in rocks. All right, one of the byproducts, so let's pick uranium moving to lead. One of the additional byproducts from uranium decay, besides lead, is helium. Helium's an inert gas, doesn't combine well with things, and so it escapes easily from the rocks and goes easily into the atmosphere. But gravity keeps helium largely. Helium is very light, but it does keep it from escaping the atmosphere a lot. And we've measured how much helium is escaping from the atmosphere. And it turns out that the total amount in the atmosphere is 1/2000th of that expected if the atmosphere were really billions of years old. So it's like a bucket with a hole in it, but somebody is pouring water into the bucket from a fire hose, right? The bucket should be full, but it's not. That means that the fire hose hasn't been on very long, right? Otherwise, the bucket would be full. So the helium escaping from rocks happens quite fast, all right, as we said. So that's the first part, is the helium in the atmosphere. That proves that the atmosphere, according to this dating method, is very, very young. The helium escaping from rocks happens quite fast, yet so much helium is still in some rocks, right? The rocks where the helium is being generated by the decay of uranium into lead, but it hasn't had time to escape yet. So you have another measuring device, right? Not just how long it takes for uranium to turn into lead, but during that process, the rock is getting filled up with helium, and the helium escapes very easily from the rock, yet it's still saturated. So when you examine the rock, it's off-gassing helium at a rapid rate. And all you do is work back the math. How long would it take for that much helium to off-gas? And it gives you an age of 6,000 years. So it shows up a couple things also. So here's the third item. Where did all that helium come from? Why didn't if uranium to lead is very slow process and there's only a little bit of helium created, why did that helium build up? How is it possible that it could have built up? Only if there had been millions of years worth of radioactive decay that happened only a few thousand years ago. Probably at creation, but if you're uncomfortable with the idea of radioactive decay happening at creation, maybe it happened at the fall, right? When the universe was forever changed because what Adam and Eve did, maybe then that's when the millions of years worth of radioactive decay happened. So that is why you get radioactive elements that tell you that the rock is old, right? Because there's a little bit of uranium and a lot of lead. So that tells you that that millions of years supposedly have gone by. But we know, in fact, that the presence of the helium, which is also a byproduct of the exact same process, is still stuck in the rocks. And that means that all of that helium was produced rapidly. And it's only been able to off-gas 6,000 years worth of off-gassing. Okay, again, I apologize for some of the complexity of this. We're going to get into some very complex things as we continue along. So if you don't understand something, write down your question and we will try to answer those questions. Lead in rocks, there's that other byproduct of uranium decay, lead in rocks. Lead slowly diffuses out of zircon crystals. And by the way, the rocks that we're talking about are usually done, they're measured in zircon crystals. Heat and pressure can increase this process. So heat and pressure will force lead to leach out of rocks at a faster rate. Now it's very slow. It's not like the helium that rapidly can be released from these rocks. It's very slow. It would take millions of years. But over millions of years, one ought to see a difference with heat and pressure. Heat and pressure would force the lead out of the zircon crystals. Yet tests from deep drill cores versus shallow ones show similar amounts of lead present, that there is no difference in the lead diffusion from deep rocks under much greater heat and pressure to shallow rocks. And that's an anomaly that just should not be if the Earth is actually millions of years. It's just exactly what we would expect to find if the Earth is only a few thousand years old. So there's the Science article that discussed that. All right, decay of Earth's magnetic field, our next piece of evidence. The Earth's magnetic field has been decaying so fast ever since we've been able to measure it. It's been shown to be decaying rapidly, that it could not be more than 10,000 years old, because if you work it backward, the magnetic field would be so strong that it potentially would interfere with physical processes. it would just be beyond believability how strong it would have to be if it continued to increase backwards that way. Rapid reversals during the flood year and fluctuations shortly after caused the energy field energy to drop even faster. So it was very strong in the past, and it's getting weaker and weaker with no signs of it being able to be supported. Evidence for a stable field generator, right? This is what evolutionists have proposed, is that there must be some kind of mechanism that keeps the magnetic field from decaying, and that just is not the case. Also, as a side note, we've measured the magnetic fields of other planets in the solar system, and when we send new satellites out, new probes out to reinvestigate those planets, decades later, we find once again that all those planets, their magnetic fields are also decaying rapidly, just as rapidly as the Earth is losing its magnetic field. Next evidence, the erosion of salt into the ocean. All right, so salt is pouring into the ocean much faster than it's escaping, right? Rainwater leaches through the soil, dissolves the salts in the soil, and takes it out to the ocean. There are very, very few ways to get salt out of the ocean once it's there. There are a few, and those ways have been measured, but it's far, far too slow for what is going in, and measurements of Earth's salinity over decades continues to show it increasing. The ocean is not nearly salty enough for this to have happened for billions of years. So whatever this process is that's making the salt, the ocean saltier and saltier, it has not been going on for billions of years. So even granting generous assumptions to the evolutionists, the ocean has a maximum age of 62 million years only, right? Of course, a young Earth person would say that the extra salt that we find was from Noah's flood, because you had a lot of ripping up of the soil and dissolving of salt during that event. Next evidence, fossilization of organic material. All right, fossilization. So organic material fossilizes in a few hundred to only a few thousand years. Tests have been done. People have had this happen to some of their property, where they'll have organic material left in mineralized areas, and it becomes fossilized or mineralized. Yet unfossilized bone and wood, supposedly millions of years old, is now regularly found. This was not the case in the past. No one believed the stories that explorers and people would say, where they claim to have found fresh dinosaur bones, that kind of thing. It just wasn't believed. But now that a major scientist a few decades ago discovered a unfossilized dinosaur bone, now people find them all the time, because they've been there all the time. But again, it had to have been an error, a mistake, something to be ignored. In this picture, you see sandstone that's hundreds of millions of years old, and stuck in it is an unfossilized piece of wood that's been carbon dated to only a few thousand years old. Next, now we get into some biology. So for those who were bored by the space stuff and some of the geology stuff, now we get decay of red blood cells. How long does it take for a red blood cell to decay away? Oops. Well, so studies of the decay rates of organic material, like tissue, blood cells, connective tissue, cells, show that even in ideal conditions, right, sub-freezing conditions, organic molecules cannot survive for more than 10,000 years. Now, this was well-published information in all the scientific literature, and this was needed information for obvious reasons, right? That you want to be able to tell if how old something is, some organic thing. If you're an archaeologist, right, and you find something organic, you need to know how fast do these things decay so that you can tell how old it is, but also for forensics purposes, right? How long can a body stay in the ground without decaying away? How long can a piece of tissue survive without a living supply, right, of blood or whatever? And we know, of course, things like mummies that are decaying, right, that are thousands of years old, and yet they're just turning to dust, right, even though they're being kept in ideal circumstances, right, argon gas rooms and things like that, and yet they will still simply decay. So this was believed until red blood cells and hemoglobin have been found in unfossilized dinosaur bone. Right? Now, all of a sudden, oh, it can't be the case that tissue can't survive. Yes, of course, red blood cells must be able to survive 65 million years since the last dinosaur, because there they are. And of course, this picture that you're looking at, that is a microscopic picture of a dinosaur bone. So, and they've stained it properly so you can actually see the nuclei of the osteocytes of the bone, and this capillary that's going through the bone tissue with red blood cells in it. So, so we just have to, I just appeal to your credulity, right? Red blood cells certainly could not survive 60 million years, 65 million years, laying in a desert in the sand, right? Which is 65 million years ago is when evolutionists think that the last dinosaur lived. So what is inside a 100 million year old dinosaur bone? Well, here are flexible blood vessels. Here is a springy tissue, right? Elastic tissue. Here's blood. These are all photographs taken by Dr. Schweitzer in her published discovery of fresh tissue inside a T-Rex thigh bone, which now scientists, since you won't be laughed out of the room if you find a fresh dinosaur bone, people are finding all the time now. So we have multiple examples now of fresh dinosaur bones with blood and other protein and osteocytes, like actual cells, bone cells, you know, very delicate. Here's an update that even some young Earth creationists may not know about, is that these bones have been, the carbon in them has been carbon tested, and it turns out that they're young, only thousands of years old according to carbon-14, and not millions of years old. All right, everybody still with me?
Yes.
Yep.
Great. All right, not too many people have fallen asleep, I hope. So let's jump into a short video. It's about a 1-minute video on T-Rex blood cells. She also was interviewed by 60 Minutes, right? 60 Minutes doesn't usually do science things. They tend to do political things. But the discovery was so startling, they interviewed her. And in that interview, and the video is available online, she says that it defies all of the known science. And she's referring to the evidence that had been well published that organic molecules simply cannot survive more than 10,000 years without being repaired by an intricate living repair mechanism. All right, next evidence, rapid sedimentation. So the Mount St. Helens eruption in Washington state produced 25 feet of finely layered sediment in a single afternoon. Now remember that evolutionists are telling you that the fine layers that you see in a geologic strata are the result of annualized rings at the annualized layers at the bottom of lakes, at the bottom of the oceans, processes that take millions and millions of years, and you just count up the thousands and thousands of fine layers, and you see that the rock layer must be millions of years old. So the problem is with things like Mount St. Helens happening and other areas, observations in river deltas also, where mud is coming in, being pushed down from a river out into the ocean, show that multi-layered sediments are formed simultaneously. They're not formed one layer upon another. They're formed as a process of the physical particles bumping up against each other while they're moving through water. So flume studies, and when you're talking about scientific theories, what you really need to depend upon is experimental evidence, right? That's what the scientific method is all about, doing experiments. So geologists have done flume studies where they mix different sized particles together and pour them out in huge operations, some of them very big, mimicking large scale floods, but in tight contained areas where they can film and use high-speed film to see what's actually going on. So the physics of the self-sorting particle distribution that creates these multi-layers has been worked out. And if somebody's interested in it, and during the question and answer, I will explain it to you. It's not that difficult to understand how this happens. So we now recognize patterns. This has become so advanced in art that you can recognize patterns in the strata laid by floodwaters that tell you how fast the water was moving and how deep it was above the where the strata was being laid down and the direction of flow. So this is really amazing. So you can point out to take a strata layer in the Grand Canyon, and by examining the layers and how they're laid down, you can tell how fast the water was moving and how deep it is. And it'll be, I've seen these reports, and there are things like 2,000 meters of water above and flowing at 60 miles per hour, things like that. All of this can be determined because we now know the physics of the particle motion in flooding water. In one experiment, finely layered sedimentary rocks, so they created it artificially with particles they put together themselves. Then they decided, well, let's take already sedimentary rock that's been laid out, crush it down to its constituent particles, mix it with water, and send it down to flume and see what happens. And it creates the exact same lamination patterns that were found in the original rocks. So this is completely repeatable, which gives the obvious conclusion that that is how those rocks were created in the first place, through a massive flood. All right, and through the self-sorting mechanism that just is what happens to particles when they're in floods conditions. So This was published in the prestigious scientific journal Nature, Spontaneous Stratification in Granular Mixtures. You know, so here is the preeminent science journal publishing the evidence that shows that actually the Earth is young. Here's some photographs. These are from these sedimentary experiments. So you can see these fine, this is, I apologize for the quality of this picture, but you can see the fine grained strata going across this. This is, the flume is going north and south, right? The flume with clear walls is going north and south. And they've cut into this and pulled back the sediment so that you can see it. And you see this layering that's happening that looks just like strata that you might see driving through maybe the Delaware water gap. Now here you see it from the side wall, looking through the plexiglass wall, and it's going right and left. And you've got 15 centimeters of sand. So this was particles where black was larger particles and white was smaller particles. And see how it goes white, black, white, black, white, black, white. And you get a large area of black and a large area of white, black, white, black, white, black. And that tells you, by this lamination, this tells you how much water is above it, how much water is above it. And if you notice in the black, these slanted, these are called bedding planes. And this you see, once you know this, you can read the rocks. Like when I visited Sedona, I was able to read the rocks to people. We were, you know, on tour, and you know, people are hiking through, and we, you know, say, hey, okay, look, you can see which way the water was flowing. So in this case, because of the direction of these bedding planes, you can tell that the water was flowing from the right to the left. Right? Isn't that cool? All right. Let's see, let me continue on. So experiments show that strata form simultaneously in moving water. I already said that. And this has been confirmed by observation at river deltas, but it's also been confirmed by observations in deep ocean drilling. So they'll have things that happen called underwater avalanches, where off the coast of a continent, massive amounts, millions of tons of debris and soil will come loose and will stream down the bottom to the bottom of the ocean. That all leaves these finely striated layers, just like you find in places like the Grand Canyon. So, all right. So now in this experiment, let me ask you a question. Where are the oldest layers? Where are the oldest layers? Are they down here? Are they up here?
Towards the bottom, like where it's
okay, right? Well, that's what we think when we see things like the Grand Canyon, right? You think, well, the oldest must be on the bottom. But remember, this was done simultaneously, right? These layers all happened simultaneously. It was done within like a minute, right? It was just poured out into this flume. The oldest layers, remember the direction of the water is from right to left. The oldest layers are on the right, and the youngest layers are on the left. That's how you have to actually read strata, because of what we know through experimentation. So what do we have around the world? Oh, let me close out. I don't know if those controls are in your way, but I see them. So we see strata, for instance, the Grand Canyon, all around the world. Rock layers cover entire continents, and these same rock layers can be traced over to other continents. which we're going to get into more in a few minutes. Let me pop back on that. There we go. Notice the razor sharp edges, right? They're just completely level time after time after time. And from the top of the Grand Canyon to the bottom of the Grand Canyon in this picture, this supposedly covers a time period of 500 million years. And yet you see nothing to confirm that, right? We're looking at erosion, right? We see how erosion is cut through 500 million years worth of rock, supposedly, right? Where are the roots of trees? Where are they? Why don't any of the layers have any trees? Did no trees ever grow here for 500 million years? Why are there no animal burrows? Did no animals ever dig into the ground during this time? There are plenty of dead animals in this, right? Billions, in fact, billions of fossils of dead animals that were consumed by this massive flood. None of them were alive to burrow into any of these layers. There's no erosion, right, except for from today, right, from after it was laid down, then it erodes away. But where is the little Grand Canyon? Let's go up 1/3 of the way, right? 150 million years since the beginning, since the bottom, right? Where is the Grand Canyon there? Where is the erosion of any canyon at all? There are none, right? There are none. Did nothing ever erode for 500 million years? There's no earthquake evidence, right? You will see earthquake evidence from the top all the way through the bottom, but that's not what we'd be looking for. Where's the earthquake that happened, the massive earthquake that happened, 400 million years ago that cracked the bottom 100 million years? Where's that crack? Or 2/3 of the way through, 200 million years later, when there's another massive earthquake that cracks it down from top to bottom of what was then the top, right? There are none. And yet today we find lots of places where there are earthquake cracks that go all the way through all of them. And that's because all the layers were laid down simultaneously. We also know that they were soft, right? They were bendable. If this bend had been done to rock layers that were solidified already, that the water and moisture had been pressed out of them already, they would have metamorphed, right, from the pressure, and they would have cracked, right? And you could look microscopically at the grains of the rock, and they would be elongated, right? Because there would be so much pressure to bend rock like this. But this was obviously bent while it was still soft. And yet this is supposed to be millions of years worth of layering. Here's another example of soft layers. Now, this takes a little bit of imagination. I have to explain to you what's on the other side. On the other side of this is Dinosaur Tracks, okay? So if you walk up this kind of incline from the other side, you're looking at the back edge of it that has been cut away and broken away. There are dinosaurs, and you see in the mud, the dinosaurs have stepped and pressed footprints into the mud. This, by the way, this person is Dr. Robert Carter. Dr. Carter and I will be going to Egypt in September to investigate the Egyptian gods that are dedicated to the first 8 people, or gods, the first 8 gods that created the earth out of a watery chaos. Right? Does that sound familiar? 8 people on a boat. And So those are the first gods that the Egyptians worshipped. Anyway, so he is on the other side of this. So this lump, let me go back to my annotation and get my little laser pointer. Okay. So in the back, on the other side of this, the top layers have broken away, eroded away, and been removed. And only this layer and everything below it is visible. And what is this here? This is a dinosaur footprint. And then the rock layer continues over this way. All of this above stuff on the other side is missing, and that's where you see the trackways. So this continues on. The dinosaur keeps walking. He steps and creates this hole in the mud. And then the next layer, after he goes away, the next layer comes in of floodwaters and fills in the footprint and that layer. And that's what preserved all these footprints. On the other side, they've broken away and fallen out on this side, but take a look at how deflected the bottom layers are underneath the weight of that dinosaur. See how curved they are? All of these layers were soft. Even this one you can see is bent by the weight of that dinosaur. He curved all these layers all the way up to here just by the weight of his foot. And it shows that all these layers were soft, and yet here they are. This would represent certainly hundreds of thousands of years based on traditional geologic reading. Okay. Here are polystriate fossils. These are tree trunks that are in layers of strata and proceed all the way through all of them. So again, millions of years. So some fossilized tree trunks are vertical and pass through multiple layers, even though secular dating puts these layers at millions of years apart. So how is that possible? The layers had to have been laid down simultaneously, or the top of the tree would have rotted away. And here, because they were encased in mud, they have fossilized, which again only takes hundreds or to thousands of years to do. Next evidence is from Specimen Ridge. Specimen Ridge is the story you're told if you go there in Yellowstone. This is a diagram of what you would see with a cutaway, of course. You get to see this side, but in their presentations and museum there, you get to see this kind of cutaway. And it's thought to be a good example of millions of years of buried forests, all growing in one spot, in the same location for millions of years. Take a look at the interesting thing about these trees. If these trees were growing in their spot, where are the roots, right? The best one you've got, you can see this. Now, again, this is a drawing, but it's an accurate drawing, right? All the roots have been ripped off, and the rest of the trunk, right? Just the thickest part of the trunk has been able to survive whatever did this to these trees. Now, if they were in water, floating, they would float with the heavy part down, right? So that explains how they could be in an upright position, even though they would have been brought in by a massive flood. The interesting thing that proves that this is not one forest on top of another for millions of years, is that tree ring studies show that these trees were all growing at the same time, right? When you have patterns, weather patterns of warm and cold winters and summers, it creates a pattern that's recognizable, and you can recognize, and so they've recognized that these trees were all growing at the same time. Next piece of evidence, sand injectites. What are sand injectites? Well, these are examples of sand injectites. Here is what is happening. So there are also clastic dikes and pipes, they're called. They are intrusions of one layer of sediment through the overlying sedimentary rock. And what this shows is, now these are found all around the world, right? What it shows is that the overlying rock strata was still soft. And because the injectites wouldn't be able to get through solid rock. They spread apart, they spread the sediments apart and make these different shapes. All right. So we have soft, formable, wet mud being laid down. Let's get into radiometric dating. Boy, what have I got? Steve, I've got about 15 minutes left. Is that right?
It's 9:16. You can go as long as you want, Keith.
Okay.
Sure.
Well, I'll try to get. I try to stop at 9:30, but there's a lot, and some of the best stuff is yet to come. Oh my goodness! You might think, wow, this is cool, or whatever, or you might be thinking, oh, this is horrible. How can this guy tell all these lies, or whatever you're thinking, you know? But there's still lots more to go. All right, radiometric dating anomalies. What are radiometric dating anomalies? How about I click on my slides again so that I can make them advance? So there are many examples where the dating methods give dates that are wrong for rocks of known historical age. Anybody recognize that picture?
Is that Mount St. Helens?
That is Mount St. Helens. So the younger people don't recognize it because that volcano erupted during Steve and my lifetime, so we know about it. People died from that eruption. So we know when the rocks in the core of that volcano were created. So an example is a, boy, I don't know how to pronounce that, dacite lava dome. I guess I'm gonna have to look it up. I usually do look up everything to make sure I'm very clear on what I'm talking about. At Mount St. Helens volcano. Although we know that the rock was formed in 1986, the rock was dated by the potassium argon method, which is typical for lava flows. That's what you use, potassium argon, and the method said that it was 0.35 plus or minus 0.05 million years old, right? Way, way off, way, way off. Another example is potassium argon dating of 5 andesite lava flows from Mount, there's a tough one, Ungaruho in New Zealand. The dates ranged from less than 0.27 to 3.5 million years. But one lava flow occurred in 1949, 3 in 1954, and 1 in 1975. Now, these are only a couple of examples. This actually, I could spend the rest of the talk talking about all of the examples of this kind of mistake of dating known rocks, and yet it gives far too old of an age. So what happened is that excess radiogenic argon from the magma, the molten rock, so that's potassium, radioactive potassium decaying into argon from the magma, was retained in the rock when it solidified. Now that's not supposed to happen. And the reason is the argon isn't supposed to be there in the magma, right? Because the magma is supposed to be billions of years old. So the argon, which again is a noble gas, it does not form chemical bonds. So it would migrate out of the magma easily and out to the surface of the Earth, and especially during volcanoes, it would just off gas immediately. So the excess argon appears to have come from the upper mantle below the Earth's crust. This is consistent with a young world, right? Because in a young world, remember, there hasn't been any time for the argon to off gas, just as we know there hasn't been enough time for helium to off gas from the rocks, right? All of this helium and this argon that was created by radiometric decay that happened right at creation. Millions of years worth of radiometric decay occurring at creation. So excess argon can cause exaggerated dates for rocks of known age. Then why would we trust the method for rocks of unknown age, right? Things get harder to date the further back in time you go. Even if the difference is only a few thousand years, it still increases the margin of error. Conflicting dates between different methods. So what happens if you use different methods to try to get an answer? Well, if two methods disagree, then at least one of them must be wrong, right? And this happens all the time. What geologists will do many times is they think they have a theory that a certain rock layer or geologic feature is of a certain age. Based, on their own theories, and so they will have it tested. If one method doesn't give them the date that they think it ought to be, they will just use a different method because they know full well that these different methods give different ages for the same rocks. So, for example, in addition to that, you can have different artifacts that are found, right? So in Australia, some wood was buried in a basalt lava flow, right? It can be seen from the charring that the wood was actually charred by the heat of the lava. So there's no doubt that it was there at the time that the lava flowed, right? The wood is dated by radiocarbon analysis at 45,000 years old. But the basalt is dated by potassium argon at 45 million years old, right? Completely diverging. And again, this is not the kind of thing that should be happening if the Earth is old, but it is exactly what we would expect to happen if the Earth is young. Again, retained argon, right? And we'll get into a little bit about carbon dating and why it says 45,000 years old instead of, say, 4,500. Other fossil wood from upper Permian rock layers have been found with carbon-14 still present. Detectable carbon-14 would have all disintegrated if the wood were older than 50,000 years, let alone the 250 million years that the evolutionists assign to these upper Permian rock layers. Okay, carbon-14 dating. Let's jump into that quickly. So carbon-14 has a short half-life. It's about 5,000 years. So half of it is gone in 5,000 years. And then in another 5,000 years, the other half is gone. Or not the other half, but half of what is remaining is gone. So that any sample older than about 60,000 years, the earlier slide said 50,000, it's, depends on how sensitive the equipment is. And now they're down to being able to measure every single molecule of carbon-14, or every single atom, I should say. So 60,000 years should have no carbon-14 left at all. So therefore, until a few decades ago, no one ever bothered to date fossil carbon sources like coal or dinosaur bones or anything, right? Anything that they found that was, say, 100,000 years old or older, they would just not bother because it had to be zero. But we now know that coal, oil, fossil wood, and even diamonds have carbon-14 dates in thousands of years and not millions, right? Even diamonds, so that the argument, well, it's somehow being contaminated, which, by the way, the people who do these tests say that's not possible. They're very, very good at what they do. They make sure that their samples have not been contaminated. And again, they can measure every single molecule, every single atom. So it's not like something is getting in that they don't know about. In 2012, 10 different samples from 8 different dinosaur bones gave dates in thousands of years, not millions of years. Radiocarbon found in diamonds. What is that all about? Let's see a little 1-minute video. Okay, seafloor sediments, on to bigger and better things. Boy, I usually have a good idea how many slides it takes for me to cover a certain time, but did we actually, we didn't actually, what time did we start? About 8:30? So yeah, I was actually planning on an hour and a half. So I've still got about a half an hour left. So I hope that everybody is staying as interested as I am. I think this is super, super interesting. But there's still better things yet to come. Did anybody know about carbon-14 being in diamonds before tonight?
I don't think so.
Nobody knew that, right?
No, never knew it.
Isn't that amazing? Don't you think you would want to know something like that? Right? All
They
right.
don't want us to know something like that.
Yeah, they're not going to tell you in the secular higher learning places that you're at, right? Okay. Seafloor sediments. So large manganese nodules exist in the first 20 inches of the seafloor. They're formed by a slow process at the surface of the seafloor. Okay. I should have had a picture. I don't know why. Well, you know what? I really, there was so much to put into these slides and so much that I had to leave out that I spent most of the, oh, Ashley Trarer wants to come in. I spent most of the time creating the content, and then I figured I'll worry about the pictures later, and then just some of it I just didn't get to. So below those 20 inches, almost no nodules exist. So the deeper sediments were formed too rapidly to allow nodules to form and grow. Radiometric dating of nodules are completely different from the observed rates of formation, right? All right. Planation surfaces. All right, what are planation surfaces? So there's another new thing you can learn. Oh boy, do I have a picture of this? I probably should have done a picture of this too. So rapid sediment formation matches land evidence of massive erosion in the recent past. All right. So there's been massive amounts of erosion from the earth into the ocean, and some of it leaves a very special pattern called a planation surface. And that is, if you've ever seen mountains where it looks like the top of them have just been planed off, you know, or cut off so that it's a flat top mountain, the below the flat top, the slopes are all sloped, but the very top, and it'll be like a plateau. There will be large areas where everything is absolutely flat. It stretches for miles and miles. So yet they know that there used to be sediments above that plane surface, that planed area. And this scouring is caused by a special kind of erosion. There are no modern erosion processes that can account for a planation surface. So even though evolutionists will say, no, you know, all that's happening today is the same as was happening in the past. There were no catastrophic events. They cannot explain how you can scour down the top of a mountain until it's absolutely razor flat. All right, so even inclined strata of varying hardnesses have been beveled completely flat. So you can imagine that a group of strata have been tilted up at an angle, and then this planation force has come along and it has actually cut through all those strata, even though some were hard and some were soft, completely equally, and just cut it right down till it was completely flat. So this coincides with what's called catastrophic sheet erosion. So sheet erosion is square miles of water, right, that are moving across a surface, and it cuts it like a knife. It's moving so fast, it does so much destructive damage that it just will cut through anything, rock, soft mud, sand, lava, anything, right? Cuts right through it. And it's sheets of water pouring off of a surface into the ocean. So that's called sheet erosion, and it's the only thing known to cause planation surfaces. It can be done experimentally in small scales, but it's the only thing that can explain the planation surfaces that are miles and miles across on the surface of the Earth. All right, so experiments, so rapid formation of different things that you've been told all your life take millions of years to create, like coal. But experiments show that conditions mimicking natural forces, coal forms quickly. It only takes weeks to create brown coal, and it takes only a few months to create black coal. And that's just mimicking conditions that are easily found out in the world. This same kind of process has been done for oil, opals, diamonds, stalagmites, and petrified wood. They can all be formed rapidly, like hundreds to thousands of years is all it takes to form massive stalagmites, petrified wood. Diamonds can be created. You know, we can artificially create diamonds now, I hope you know. Many people don't know that you can create opals artificially, so be careful when you go opal shopping next time. So they do not need millions of years to form. All right, now we're going to get into something really interesting. We'll get away from rocks and radiometrics for a while, and we'll start talking about people. This is interesting. We're going to watch the first, I think this is like 8 minutes long. We're going to watch the first 6 minutes of this. What about the patriarchs' lifespans? And then you'll see how this moves in to a way of dating the Earth. So you've got the evidence that the written account is actually real, which adds credence to the main event in that account, which is the flood and Noah. But I'll be showing you in a little bit about what we've been able to do with genetics and tracing genetic mutations backwards. Let's see, what else was there about that? I do a talk that's on my podcasts, which you can get at Evidence for Faith on any podcast distribution app. You just go to Evidence and the number 4 Faith, and there I have about 200 podcasts there, and one of them is on did the patriarchs really live to 900 years? And it talks about what we know about the science of aging now. And I know many of my students know about this now because you get taught it at the university about telomeres. And the length of your telomeres determines ahead of time how long you're going to live, how many times your cells are permitted to divide. So the obvious conclusion that one of the mutations was causing shortening of the telomeres until it stabilized, so that people live between 70 to 120 years now. All right, mitochondrial DNA. So mitochondrial DNA is the DNA that's not in the nucleus of the cell. It's kept outside the nucleus in the body of the cell in a small organelle called a mitochondria that is the power generating system for the cell. And it has its own DNA because there's a lot of activity going on there, and it just needs a set of instructions immediately available to it because of all the things that can go wrong with power generating. So now this is then passed on from mother to child without being mixed up with the DNA of the father. And that allows us to track these mutations. And the DNA mutates over time. Like anything else, it's wearing out and errors creep in. So it passes from mother to child without mixing with the father's mitochondrial DNA. Worldwide rates of change have been carefully measured. Oh, I got measured in there twice. I'm seeing double. And this means, great-grandmother, daughter, granddaughter, on and on, multiple generations. Indigenous populations around the world have all had their mitochondrial studied, and how long it takes to mutate, how quickly does mitochondrial DNA mutate. So if you compare the data, how similar or how different the mitochondria is from everybody on Earth and how fast it's changing, all you have to do is back up that time. And this gives a time frame of 6,000 years. So human beings have only been on the planet for 6,000 years based on the actual measurements of mitochondrial DNA mutation. This is an example of population dispersion patterns, migration patterns, done using mitochondrial DNA. These patterns match the, let me see if I can, you can see my pointer. Match descriptions given in Genesis. Now, here's one thing about this. It's very easy, you can tell what direction people went if you have more than 2 data points. Right? If you have 3 data points, you're looking for the direction which has the most mutations. So the further away you move, the more likely you are to have mutations. So the most mutated people arrive down here. And it's not, you know, anything racist or not. This is the facts. Now, if you're here, it looks like, well, it says it came out of Africa, but that's because before these measurements, they already believed in the out of Africa theory. If you go from the actual origin could actually be over here, right? You can't tell because you can't tell which direction. They're just different, right? This one is different from this one. You can only tell the direction if you have multiple locations. So this actually isn't necessarily the beginning. The beginning could be right here where these other people groups are breaking off. So one goes this way, one goes this way, one goes this way, one goes this way, one comes down this way. So, and that will match the Y chromosome data also, and even the nuclear genetic measurements that have been done. Okay, so there's more additional proof that not only the creation and flood, but also the Babel story is correct. So it matches the Bible's description in the Table of Nations in Genesis 11. Oh, here's an interesting side thing is that Eve's original mitochondrial DNA has been resequenced, right? We now know what Eve's mitochondrial DNA. This was actually done by the two geneticists that I've already showed you pictures of earlier, Dr. Robert Carter, a PhD geneticist, and Dr. John Sanford, PhD geneticist, inventor of the gene gun. Those men worked together and were able to resequence by, figuring out which were mutations and which were the original, and moving it back until they were able to determine the actual DNA sequence of Eve, which is a terrific thing for the future for medical problems. There's lots of mitochondrial diseases because of the mutations that are adding up. Here is Y chromosome haplotype. This is a little more clear to see that the originating source is the Middle East. All of these down here, these are all different haplotypes or gene sequences in the Y chromosome. And when bottlenecks occur, when small groups of population move away from larger groups, they take with them only a representative sample, only a few. And the further you move away, the more time you do that, the more chances you have of losing information until again you get out to South America and everybody is very what's called homozygous. Right, the information that they share in the Y chromosome is all identical. If you go back, you see the original sources had more information until the most diverse population of Y chromosome males is in the Middle East, right in this region in the Middle East. When human beings moved into Africa, they took only part of the DNA information. When they went into Europe, only part of the DNA information, up into Siberia, down into Australasia, only part of the information. So, so this is how we trace ancestries, but you can see once again it points to the Middle East. Okay, evolutionary genetic clocks. What are evolutionary genetic clocks? DNA sequence comparisons between taxa to estimate rates of mutation. All right, DNA sequence comparisons between taxa, different groups of species, to estimate the rates of mutation. These are by evolutionists routinely calibrated to paleontology. They have to match them to what they believe happened in the fossil record according to evolution. And the reason they have to do that, why they have to constantly recalibrate them, is because they don't match. Different genes give widely different rates. So if you calibrate one set of genes according to paleontology, you find out when you come to the next set of genes that they don't match at all. So then that has to be recalibrated. And then you test another set of genes in those different taxa, and it doesn't match. Different taxa exhibit different rates for homologous sequences, right? They should be similar, but they're different. Divergent dates commonly disagree with paleontology despite being calibrated with it, as I just explained. All right, now we need a little bit of explanation about mutations and neutrality. Standard evolutionary doctrine states that most mutations are neutral due to the redundance of codons. Codons are just like the words in the sentence of the nuclear information. Presence of large amounts of junk DNA would be expected from evolutionary doctrine, right? Because it's just accidental mutations over millions of years. So most of it doesn't work, it's just junk. But recent discoveries falsify this view. Corresponding codons actually help control expression. So the fact that there's redundancy is actually useful, it's not accidental. DNA shows pervasive biochemical functionality. The presence of junk DNA is a myth. The vast majority of the DNA is actually functional, which makes no sense in a evolutionary theory. This was a falsification of evolutionary theory. Then comes along the DNA bar code project. So scientists wanted to figure out if there was an easy way to, if you had some DNA, that you could identify what species the DNA came from. So they looked at, it was a 10-year study of DNA published by the journal Evolution, right? One of the leading evolutionary journals, obviously. January 2019. They examined 5 million organisms in 100,000 species. And here is what they found. By tracing the genetic information, here's what they found. All human beings came from 2 parents. Okay, that was disputed by evolutionists. Species show little variation. So within a species, genetically, they're very, very similar. Differences between species are, however, genetically vast. Now, that's not supposed to be true according to Darwinian evolution. You're supposed to have a gradual change from one species into the next. They're not supposed to be clumped together like islands, islands in an ocean. In fact, 90% of all species also came from 2 parents. So they were able to identify that the genetic modification over time showed that they came from 2 parents and not from large populations of species. And this generation from 2 parents happened at the same time. Are you hearing me, people? Right. So elephants are descended from 2 original elephant pair, male and female elephants, and they happen to be have the same number, the same time as crocodiles that also came from 2 parents, as ostriches, right? All these different species which have different mutation rates, but when you trace them back, they all arrive at their two parents at the same time. This generation happened in the recent past. Now, if you use just the raw data and you look at the current mutation rates of these animals, and you put that in the formula and calculate back how long did it take until they got to their two parents, it happens to be 5,000 to 6,000 years. Right about the time, 5,000 would be about the time of Noah's flood. But they don't do that because they don't like the answer. So what they do is they again adjust it to paleontology. So they estimated that there must have been some massive event that killed everything living on the planet, virtually everything, down to just a few mating pairs about 300,000 years ago. Now, the problem is that geologically, we know of no such event that happened at that time frame. But this is what the data forces them to do, because they are unwilling to accept the actual raw data that shows that all this happened. I thought I had the, oh, darn, I don't have the paper. Well, you can look it up, January 2019 Evolution Journal. Okay, let's see, it is 10 o'clock. I guess we should go to question and answer. I've still got tons on genetic entropy. Let's see, let me just cruise through this. Genetic entropy. Geographic dispersion, languages, research on tracing languages across the globe, mitochondrial clocks, date to 6,000 years, how many mutations you're likely to have, mutations per generation, published in Nature Genetics, using our empirical rate to calibrate the mitochondrial molecular clock would result in an age of mitochondrial DNA. This is a study in humans of 6,500 years. And then the next sentence is, but no one thinks this is the case. So what did they do? They changed the data. They matched it up with what evolutionists told them must be true about human evolution. Let's see, I brought that back in. Flood stories, this is important. 700 known flood stories around the globe. How is that possible? The closer to the Middle East the stories originate, the more they match the Bible. As people moved away from the Middle East, they lost parts of the information about the flood stories, Babel stories, creation stories. Ancient historians throughout the world recorded the flood in their histories. So you go back, 2,000 years ago, and you look at the historians, and they're writing about the flood. Ancient genealogy lines of royal lines. So these are the birth ancestry of kings, of people groups. So they were very careful to keep track of their genealogies. The Danish, Vikings, and the Anglo-Saxons were very proud of their noble blood, and they've kept accurate records for thousands of years and traced their ancestry back to Noah and his sons and grandsons. What are earth blobs? Oh my gosh, we have to do this. We have to do this. Does anybody know what earth blobs are? Did I lose everybody?
I have no idea. And by the way, this is all very fascinating.
Okay, good.
Keep going.
I hope I'm not boring people. Earth blobs are a recent discovery in the last 5 years, I believe. Earth blobs, so here's my mouse. This grayed out area, that is the Earth. And they've grayed it out so that you can see inside. This Blue-green is the nickel core of the Earth. These are mysterious, right? You can look online and you'll see the mystery of Earth blobs. They have no idea what they are, but we do. Earth blobs were discovered by computer analysis of earthquake waves. They're located below the edges of plate subduction. All right, so you know plate tectonics, and you know plates are subducting under other plates, right? These blobs are right below those regions around the globe. They are denser, and they are 3,000 degrees cooler than the surrounding mantle. So the mantle is 3,000 degrees hotter than this material, this rock. How is it that those could still have not equaled? How could that rock not be melted yet so that it has reached the temperature of the mantle surrounding it? The reason is because it's only been in the mantle a few thousand years, and it hasn't been completely melted. So I have to show you this, and we'll stop, because even though there's, I could just go on hour after hour with more and more evidence. There are literally books written that have hundreds of evidences for a young Earth. But this should do it. If I haven't convinced everybody yet, this should do it.